Who's in charge? When we add horizontal or process management to vertical or functional management, isn't that going to be confusing? If we're now managing across as well as up and down the org chart, who is in charge? If we now have a process owner who's accountable for cross-functional process, what does that mean for the functional managers in charge of executing the parts of the processes? Will the addition of process governance mean that we have continuous argument rather than continuous improvement? There is a way to make it work and work well, but it may not be what you're expecting. Who's in charge? That's the process governance question. Or perhaps a better question might be, what do we mean by in charge? If the process view says we're going to create, accumulate and deliver value in collaboration across the organisation, then maybe the management of all of that also needs to be collaborative. So in this process insight, I want to talk about process governance and what we can do to make that practical solution in the real world. Firstly, let's just review what we mean by process-based management. So we'll use my principle of the primacy of process to understand that. And that says that there are two dimensions to each organisation, two perspectives that we need to worry about. There's the traditional or vertical functional organisation, but we also know now that we create, accumulate and deliver value across the organisation, and therefore we need to add that additional horizontal view. So in the vertical dimension, this is traditional management, functional organisation. It's mainly about managing resources and all the many questions that go with that. And the key artifact is going to be the organisation chart. None of that changes because we add the process dimension. We make no change at all necessarily to traditional functional organisational management. But in the horizontal direction, we know that we create, accumulate and deliver value. That is our products and services and experiences. We do that across the organisation. So we need to add this horizontal view, process organisation. And by the way, when we say that's how we create, accumulate and deliver value, it's the same as saying how we execute our strategy. That makes it important. So here we are then, and in the horizontal direction, the key artifact is going to be the process architecture. So that's the primacy of process. That's a kind of one picture description of process-based management. Now, in terms of our process governance, what are going to be the issues that we need to think about? Well, the most important one is going to be who's in charge. So we've just created this new role, let's say it's process owner, some mechanism to think about what's happening across the organisation. What happened to all of the functional managers who are there executing the various pieces of the process, the cross-functional process? We need to be careful we don't create continuous argument rather than continuous improvement. But we will have problems, won't we? Inevitable. So how would we resolve those issues in this slightly more complicated world? And maybe this sounds to some people like it's very expensive. We're building a whole new layer of management. It's going to be cumbersome and difficult and expensive and resource hungry. No, it's not going to be any of those, but we do need to have a good answer for that question. And related to that, is it practical? I mean, how do we make this work in the real world? How do we keep it effective but simple and straightforward and give it a good chance of actually delivering what we want it to without being a burden that's going to cripple it going forward? So let's see if we can answer some of those questions. So this is my model, my tripartite model of process governance to get effective management. And it has three elements to it, the three elements that help us address those questions that we were just talking about a moment ago. So we need authority, we need support, and we need ownership. So let's look at each of those in turn. In brief here in this video, we'll do some more detailed ones on some of this at a later time. But let's talk about process owners first. So this is a new role for many organisations. And by the way, all of the names here on this picture, you can change to whatever you like. And sometimes process owners might be called process custodians, process leaders. I don't care what the name is, as long as everyone understands what the role is and isn't. I'll use the terms that we've got on the screen. So for process owner, this is a new role. It's a part-time role, and it's someone whose job it is to look across functional process and to take account of its performance. So this is the piece that's solving that lack of horizontal management vision that we've seen previously, because the organisation chart says nothing of a practical nature about who manages across the chart. So the process owner is the person, the role now, whose job it is to look at the process performance across the functions, to think about performance, to think about issues, to look for opportunities, and to facilitate the collaborative management of that cross-functional process. The Office of BPM, or the Centre of Excellence, Centre of Expertise, Organisational Excellence Team, whatever you want to call that, this is the support team. And I think of it as a smallish group, and I think it's there to be a kind of life support system, an internal consulting group to help everyone else. And I think their main role, is to increase the capability of the rest of the organisation. It's a mistake, in my view, to set them up so that they do all of the process work, because that's self-limiting. I mean, you must be creating a bottleneck if you do that. So their role is to help everyone else to do the process work. They retain some residual ability, of course, to do the necessary quality control. They are the super users. They're the people with all of the knowledge. They're there to help. They reserve the right to pop in and have a look to make sure everything's still going well and the methodologies are being used properly, etc. So, they have some compliance management, but their main role, I think, is to help everyone else in the organisation to do the process work. They're a life support system. Now, the Process Council, so I, more in hope than expectation, identify an organisation here chaired by a CEO. Very nice if that happens, but sometimes it doesn't. But this is a high-level group that's able to make organisation-wide decisions. That's the key part. So it's some sort of executive committee. It might even be the executive committee, as long as it has very good focus on process and the process material doesn't just slip down to the bottom of the agenda and get lost. So this needs to be an active group. And their role is to have a look at all of the process work, to take organisational oversight, to make sure that the process architecture and the process work is still reflecting strategy, that the performance improvements are being delivered, and also, importantly, to be the end point of escalation processes. So a process owner is having some difficulty arriving at decisions with functional managers, then the process owner and the functional managers may first, if they can't resolve it, they might ask the Office of BPM for some assistance. And ultimately, if it doesn't get resolved there, and maybe it can't be, maybe it needs executive decision, then that can be taken to the Process Council. So the Process Council, apart from having a strategic oversight, is the end point of all escalation pathways. They're the decision makers who can resolve problems that might arise. And inevitably, problems will arise. So we do need to have that clear mechanism. So that's the tripartite model of process governance. This gives us authority, organisational-wide authority. It gives us support, and it gives us that new process ownership role. And I think if we can get all that going, and we can get that going relatively quickly, and it's not expensive, and we can do it in an incremental way, then I think we're in good shape to be starting to deliver good process-based management. So let's just summarise the key ideas we've had here in this video. So the process owner, I guess, is the most important and new role. It's a part-time role. We'll do some more detail about that in another video, but I think it's so important that it's set up not as a position of authority, but certainly as a position of influence, very strong influence, with an accountability to act on behalf of the cross-functional process. So it's not a position of authority. We haven't changed any of the authority structures of the organisation, but we've introduced some additional oversight, an additional role that's there to collaborate, to facilitate the collaborative working of the functional managers and others involved in executing a cross-functional process. And now we've got a process council to give us that oversight, and we've got an escalation pathway, because there will be problems. There'll be conflicts between, say, a cross-functional process KPI and the KPI of some functional piece. There'll easily be some issues to resolve there that will need executive decision making. So we defined all of these escalation paths so we can solve that problem. Office of BPM, I think, is a life support system for everyone else. Their job is to raise capability across the organisation. They are not the people who are there to do all of the process work. That's just not possible. You will simply create a bottleneck. I have called them in the past the Office for the Prevention of Process Improvement when you get into that kind of situation, and that's not what we want. So we can solve the problems and we can create good process governance if we've got effective mechanisms for authority, for ownership and support. And it's possible to do. It's not an onerous task, but it's a necessary task if we're going to do good process-based management, which will let us make wise choices about which processes to choose and then be able to get on and make effective process improvements and therefore deliver, which is the whole point of process-based management, improved organisational performance.